It all started with the house. An old Victorian mansion on the outskirts of Maple Creek, Oregon, a town where time seemed to flow a little slower. For Tom and Sarah Miller, who had escaped the concrete jungle of Los Angeles with their 10-year-old daughter, Lily, it was exactly what they needed. The house became their project, their fresh start. The creaky floorboards, high ceilings, and overgrown garden promised a quiet life filled with simple joys. The couple spent their weekends stripping old wallpaper and sanding down wooden panels. The house gradually filled with their laughter, the smell of paint, and future memories. But the living room, the heart of the home, remained empty. It was missing a centerpiece, something with history that could tie their new life and the old walls together. One Saturday, when a drizzling rain had driven everyone indoors, Sarah suggested a trip to the little antique shop on Main Street they had yet to visit. The shop was called Time's Relics, and its window was cluttered with dusty artifacts from bygone eras. Inside, it smelled of mothballs and old wood. The air was still and heavy, as if time itself had frozen here. Behind the counter sat a wrinkled old man with eyes that seemed to have seen more than one person should. The shop owner merely nodded at them, not looking up from the silver snuffbox he was mending. The family wandered through the narrow aisles, crammed with furniture, dishes, and faded paintings. And it was there, in the farthest, darkest corner, that they saw it. A wall clock. It was enormous, at least 4 feet tall, made of a dark, almost black wood covered in intricate carvings of intertwined ivy branches. The face, made of yellowed ivory, was adorned with elegant Roman numerals, and a heavy brass pendulum hung motionless, like a sleeping heart. The hands were frozen at 12:03. The clock wasn't working. "It's beautiful," Sarah whispered, running her fingers over the smooth surface of the wood. "It's creepy," Lily decided, hiding behind her father. Tom, who had always appreciated craftsmanship, was captivated. "How old is it?" he asked, approaching the counter. The old man, without raising his head, rasped, "Who knows? Some things are older than we can imagine. It doesn't work. The mechanism has been broken for a long time." "I could fix it," Tom said confidently. He'd always loved tinkering with mechanics. "How much do you want for it?" The shop owner finally looked up at him. His eyes were a faded blue, like a washed-out sky. "It's not for sale. It's part of the collection." But Sarah had already pictured the clock hanging over the fireplace in their new living room. She was persistent. After much persuasion and an offer well above a reasonable price, the old man reluctantly agreed. While the couple was finalizing the purchase, he approached Lily, who was warily eyeing the clock. "Every clock has its own time," he whispered to her, so quietly that only she could hear. "Some show what will be. Others, what has been. But this one is special. It doesn't show. It returns." Lily shivered and clung tighter to her father's hand when he came to get her. Transporting the clock was an event in itself. It barely fit in their SUV. When it was finally hung on the living room wall, it instantly transformed the room. It looked as if it had always been there, as if the house itself had been built around it. Tom spent the entire evening tinkering with the mechanism, cleaning gears, oiling springs, and blowing away decades of dust. Sarah and Lily sat on the sofa, watching him. Finally, with a soft click, he hung the pendulum in place and gently swung it. Tick, tock, tick, tock. A deep, measured sound filled the house. It was calming, like a heartbeat. The family smiled as they watched the second hand begin its slow journey around the dial. "Told you I could fix it," Tom said with pride, wiping his hands. That night, they went to bed with a sense of satisfaction. The house was almost complete. A new life had begun. The steady ticking of the clock lulled them to sleep, measuring out the minutes of their future. But in the middle of the night, something changed. The sound became different. Wrong. Tom woke up first. Sitting up in bed, he listened. Silence. Maybe he dreamt it. As he was about to lie back down, he heard it again. Cot. Ksit. Cot. Ksit. The sound was coming from the living room. It sounded like their new clock, but at the same time, completely different. It was backward. Tom slipped quietly out of the bedroom and tiptoed down the stairs. Moonlight flooded the living room through the large windows, casting long shadows. His gaze fell upon the clock. The pendulum was swinging steadily. But the second hand was moving counterclockwise. It was going backward. He froze, staring at the impossible sight. The tick-tock had become a tock-tick. Seconds weren't flowing forward. They were being pulled back into the clock's face. He stepped closer, his own heart starting to beat in unison with the clock's wrong rhythm. The minute hand trembled slightly and moved a fraction of a millimeter. Backward. He must have assembled something wrong. A stupid mistake. He'd fix it tomorrow. Wearily rubbing his eyes, Tom went back to bed, deciding that morning would bring clarity. He fell asleep to the quiet, unsettling whisper of the clock, which was relentlessly counting time in reverse. He didn't yet know that it was counting down more than just seconds and minutes. It was counting down their lives. Morning arrived with the gray, diffused light typical of Oregon. Tom woke up feeling exhausted, as if he hadn't slept at all. The unnerving rhythm of cock-sit had become background noise, so constant that his brain had almost stopped noticing it. Almost. "You look awful," Sarah said at breakfast, placing a cup of coffee in front of him. "Tossing and turning all night?" "The clock," he mumbled. "It's running backward. I must have messed something up in the mechanism." Sarah gave a skeptical hum. "Backward? Tom, you're probably just tired. Let me see." She went into the living room and returned a moment later, frowning. "That's weird. It really is going the other way. You and your toys." She smiled, but a shadow of concern flickered in her eyes. After breakfast, Tom, armed with his tools, went back to work on the clock. Taking it off the wall, he disassembled the entire mechanism again, every gear, every spring. He checked it against diagrams of antique clocks online, but everything was assembled correctly. There was no logical reason for it to behave this way. 3 hours later, covered in grease and frustration, he hung it back up. He swung the pendulum. Tick. Tock. For the first few seconds, the hand moved correctly. Tom let out a sigh of relief. But then, as if an invisible force had flipped a switch, it froze, trembled, and began to crawl in the opposite direction. Caught. Sit. Caught. Sit. Damn it! He swore, kicking an armchair. He decided to leave it for later. Maybe he should take it to a real clockmaker. Meanwhile, subtle oddities began to occur. Sarah, while clearing the dishes, noticed that the cut on Tom's finger, which he'd gotten yesterday opening a can of paint, had vanished. Only a faint pink line remained. "Look at that," she said, taking his hand. "Healed up in no time. I told you should have put a band-aid on it." Tom glanced at his finger distractedly. He'd forgotten about the cut. Huh. Must not have been very deep. Later, when Lily came back from a walk, she ran into the house, her eyes shining. "Mom, Dad, look!" she exclaimed, pointing to her knee. 2 days ago, she had fallen off her bike and scraped the skin. The large, ugly scab had been sore and kept her up at night. Now, in its place, was smooth, unbroken skin. "It's gone! It doesn't hurt at all!" Lily cheered. Sarah and Tom exchanged a look. "Kids heal fast," Sarah said uncertainly, but her words sounded unconvincing even to herself. By evening, the oppressive feeling had intensified. The clock's backward ticking seemed to have saturated the very air in the house. It was distracting, creating a dissonance in the familiar rhythm of life. Conversations became fragmented. They found themselves forgetting what they had just been talking about. Sarah, while dusting, felt a surge of energy she hadn't experienced in years. The chronic pain in her lower back, which had plagued her since her pregnancy, had almost subsided. She straightened up, listening to her own body in surprise. Tom, looking in the bathroom mirror, noticed that the gray hairs at his temples, which had appeared a couple of years ago, were less prominent. A few silver strands had simply disappeared, vanished. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to find a logical explanation. The lighting? Fatigue? That night, none of them could sleep. The sound of time moving in reverse became deafening in the nocturnal silence. Sarah got up and went to the living room. She needed to do something with her hands to distract herself. She took out an old photo album they had brought from Los Angeles. She flipped through the pages, lost in memories. There was their wedding. There was Lily's birth. Her first step. And there was last Christmas, just 9 months ago. In the photo, Lily was smiling widely, and there was a gap in her smile, a lost baby tooth. Sarah remembered how they had laughed and waited for the tooth fairy. A chill ran down her spine. "Tom," she called in a quiet, breaking voice. "Tom, come here. Quickly." He came downstairs, alarmed by her tone. "What's wrong?" Sarah silently pointed to the photograph and then looked upstairs, toward Lily's bedroom. Understanding her without words, they went up to the nursery together. Lily was asleep, curled up under the blanket. Her breathing was even and calm. Sarah, careful not to wake her, gently opened her mouth. The moonlight streaming through the window illuminated 2 perfect rows of teeth. In the spot where there had been a gap just yesterday morning, stood a small, white, and perfectly whole baby tooth. The parents recoiled from the bed, staring at each other in horror. It was impossible. Absurd. But it was a fact. They left the room and silently went down to the living room. Their gazes were fixed on the clock on the wall. The pendulum swung indifferently, measuring out stolen moments. The hands crawled slowly backward. Caught. Ksit. Caught. Ksit. The realization hit them like an icy avalanche. It wasn't about the clock. Or rather, not just about the clock. The clock wasn't simply running backward. It was pulling time along with it. Their time. With every swing of the pendulum, they weren't just losing a second of the future. A second of the past was being taken from them. The scrape, the cut, the gray hairs, the lost tooth, all of it had been erased. Rewound. They were getting younger. And there was nothing joyful about it. It was unnatural. Terrifying. Because they didn't know where the point of no return was. What would happen when Lily's time was rewound to a point before she could walk? Or talk? What would happen to them when the clock erased their wedding day? The day they met? What would happen when they reached the very beginning? Would they disappear? Dissolve into the nothingness from which they had once emerged? A cold, sticky fear enveloped Tom and Sarah. They stood in the middle of their new living room, in the house of their dreams, and realized they were trapped. And the clock on the wall wasn't just a piece of decor. It was their jailer. And it was counting down their lives. Panic came suddenly, replacing the numbing horror. Tom's first impulse was action. He had to stop it. Right now. "I'm going to stop it," he snarled, a metallic edge in his voice that Sarah hadn't heard in a long time. He grabbed a chair, intending to smash the damned mechanism, but Sarah caught his arm. "No! Wait! We don't know what will happen! What could be worse, Sarah? Disappearing? Dissolving? Every tick of this clock is erasing us." Pushing her aside, Tom approached the clock. He didn't smash it. Instead, he carefully opened the glass door and reached for the heavy brass pendulum. He remembered its weight, its coldness. He grabbed it to stop its motion, and felt himself thrown back. It wasn't a physical force, not a blow. Something else. It was as if the very air around the pendulum had become dense and elastic, repelling his hand with incredible energy. Tom staggered back, rubbing his wrist, where a sharp pain had flared up. Caught. Ksit. Caught. Ksit. The pendulum hadn't missed a single beat. It continued its hypnotic, unnatural movement. It won't stop," Tom whispered, looking at his trembling hands. And then the second, deeper wave of fear hit. They weren't just trapped. They were powerless. "We have to leave," Sarah said decisively, her voice trembling but firm. "We'll get Lily and go. Right now. We'll go to a hotel, anywhere, Just away from here. The idea seemed like a salvation. Simple and obvious. The problem was the house, the clock. So they just had to leave this place. They rushed upstairs, woke a sleepy and confused Lily, and frantically started throwing things into bags. Clothes, documents, some food from the fridge. They worked in silence, united by a common terror. Every glance they exchanged was filled with fear. Are you seeing this too? Are you feeling it too? 15 minutes later, they were in the car. Tom started the engine, and its roar in the night silence seemed like the most beautiful sound in the world, the sound of escape. He turned on the headlights, and their beams cut a piece of the gravel driveway leading to the gate out of the darkness. They pulled out onto the road. Tom floored the gas pedal. The house with its dark windows was left behind. We did it, Sarah breathed, looking back. We're out. They drove a mile, then another. The lights of Maple Creek should have appeared around the bend any moment. But they didn't. The road remained dark and deserted. That's strange, Tom muttered. We should have reached the town by now. He kept driving. 5 miles. 10. The forest on either side of the road was like a black, impenetrable wall. Not a single streetlight, not a single oncoming car. Suddenly, Sarah screamed. Tom, stop! He slammed on the brakes. In the headlights, right in front of them, stood their own gate. And behind it, their house. They were back. No, that's impossible, Tom stammered, his hands gripping the steering wheel in a death grip. I was driving straight. I didn't turn. He turned the car around and drove in the opposite direction. The same story. 10 minutes of frantic driving on an empty road, and they were back at their own gate. It was as if the road was a loop, an invisible circle closing in on their damned house. They tried again. And again. The result was the same. In despair, they got out of the car and started walking. But as soon as they reached the edge of their property, the old oak tree that marked its boundary, the world in front of them distorted. The air shimmered as if from heat, the trees on the other side of the road blurred and smeared, like a watercolor painting brushed with a wet cloth. Stepping forward was like stepping into water. An instinctual, primal fear of the unknown prevented them. They were locked in. An invisible dome covered their house and land, cutting them off from the rest of the world. Defeated, they returned to the house. The sound of the backward ticking greeted them like a malevolent laugh. Caught. Ksit. Caught. Ksit. They spent the night sleepless, sitting on the living room sofa, staring at their enemy. By morning, a new, more insidious symptom was added to their physical and mental exhaustion. Tom, do you remember the names of our neighbors in Los Angeles? Sarah asked suddenly. You know, the ones who lived next door. With the dog. Tom frowned. He remembered their faces perfectly, remembered their annoying dog that barked at night. But the name. The name was on the tip of his tongue, but it slipped away like a grain of sand. Something with a D. Davidson's? No. He gave up. I can't remember. Me neither, Sarah said quietly. It was a trifle, a minor detail, but they both understood what it meant. The clock wasn't just erasing their bodies. It was erasing their memories. Slowly, piece by piece, it was dismantling their past, leaving empty spaces behind. Yesterday, they forgot to buy milk. Today, the neighbors' names. What would they forget tomorrow? Their first kiss? Their wedding? Their own daughter's name? Lily woke up and came downstairs. She looked different. A little shorter, her face more childish and round. She rubbed her eyes and said, I dreamed about Mr. Whiskers. Mr. Whiskers was her hamster. He had died almost a year ago. Lily had grieved for weeks but had eventually come to terms with it. Now she spoke of him as if he were still alive, as if he were waiting for her in his cage upstairs. Time had rewound to a point where his loss had not yet become a reality for her. Sweetie, we talked about this. Sarah began gently, but fell silent under Tom's heavy gaze. It was useless. For Lily, that conversation hadn't happened yet. Despair became almost tangible. They were trapped in a cage where time was devouring them alive, erasing their identities, their history, their love. The old man, Tom said, his voice hollow and empty. The one who sold us the clock. He knew. He must have known. He's the only one who can help us. The hope was faint, ghostly, but it was all they had left. But how will you get to him? We can't leave. I have to try, Tom replied, getting up. I'll go alone. Maybe it only affects us all together. Maybe it will let one of us go. He walked to the door. He kissed the numb Sarah, ruffled the hair of Lily, who was looking at her parents with bewilderment. I'll be back. I'll fix everything, he promised, though he didn't believe it himself. Tom left the house and walked resolutely down the path to the border of their world. To the old oak tree, beyond which reality distorted. He didn't know what awaited him there, but he had to pass through that veil. For his family. For their stolen future. Sarah and Lily stood at the window, watching Tom's figure recede. With each step that brought him closer to the boundary, he seemed to move slower, as if wading through thick, invisible water. When he reached the old oak tree, his silhouette trembled like a reflection on water, and for a moment, Sarah thought he was dissolving. She held her breath. Then he made a final, desperate lunge and vanished. Simply disappeared from view. The road beyond the oak became sharp and still again. An ordinary country road under a gray Oregon sky. Is Daddy playing hide-and-seek? Lily asked, tugging on Sarah's sleeve. Her voice was higher than it was yesterday. Sarah looked at her daughter. God, she looked exactly like she did at 9. Her cheeks had become childishly plump again, her gaze more naive. How much more had they lost during the night? Yes, sweetie. Something like that, Sarah whispered, hugging her daughter. She was alone. Alone in a house where time flowed backward, devouring her child and herself. The incessant cock-sit of the clock became the sound of her own disintegration. Meanwhile, Tom, having stepped through the invisible barrier, collapsed onto his knees on the asphalt. It felt as if he'd been dragged through icy sludge filled with shards of glass. His whole body ached, and his head was buzzing. Fragments of images flickered before his eyes, like static on an old TV. The face of a doctor he couldn't remember, the first apartment he and Sarah had rented, the taste of a birthday cake he felt he'd never had. That was the price of passage. A piece of his past, torn out by the roots. He stood up, staggering. The air here was different. Fresh. Real. Looking back, he saw his house. It looked dim and unreal, like an old photograph. Tom knew he couldn't return the same way. The town was 2 miles away. 2 miles felt like an eternity. Every passing car, every person going about their business, looked like a ghost from another, normal life. Tom felt like an outsider, a carrier of some terrible disease. The antique shop, Time's relics, looked exactly the same as it did that day. Dusty, quiet, frozen. The bell above the door jingled just as mournfully. The old man was sitting behind the same counter, but this time he wasn't fixing anything. He was just looking at Tom, and in his faded eyes, there was no surprise, no sympathy. Only a universal weariness. I've been expecting you, he rasped. His voice was as dry as autumn leaves. What did you sell us? Tom blurted out, approaching the counter. His hands clenched into fists. What is that clock? I didn't sell it to you, the old man replied calmly. You took it. I warned you it wasn't for sale. Some things choose their own owners. The clock chose you. It's killing my family. It's erasing us. My daughter, she's getting younger, she's forgetting everything. We're trapped in the house. The clock doesn't kill, the shop owner countered. It returns. I told the girl. It's simply doing what it was made to do. It rewinds time for those who are near it. And the house is now its case. Its own little world where it can work without interference. A chill ran down Tom's spine at this calm, almost scientific explanation. You have to help me. You must know how to stop it. The old man sighed, a sigh that seemed to last an eternity. Stop it! You can't stop time. You can only try to get out of its way. He slowly rose and beckoned Tom to follow him into the back of the shop, into a cluttered storeroom. At that moment in the house, Sarah felt the panic begin to leave her. That was the most terrifying part. In place of fear, a dull apathy was setting in. She watched Lily, who was now engrossed in drawing funny little people with disproportionately large heads in a sketchbook, the way she used to draw 2 years ago. Sarah tried to remember what she had been worried about 5 minutes ago, but the thought slipped away. Something important, something about Tom. She went to the mirror in the hallway. A woman in her early 30s looked back at her. The crow's feet she so detested had smoothed out. Her skin was firmer. She looked fresher, more carefree. And it was repulsive. She wasn't just losing wrinkles. She was losing years of experience, years of love, years of motherhood. Her gaze fell on the clock. Cot. Ksit. Cot. Ksit. She suddenly found herself thinking that the sound was calming. So steady. So predictable. It was lulling her consciousness, sinking her into a warm, viscous oblivion. In the storeroom of the antique shop, the old man pulled a dusty tapestry from the wall, revealing a safe behind it. He fumbled with the lock for a long time before the heavy door gave way. Inside, on a velvet cushion, lay a single object, a small device resembling an hourglass, made of black metal and dull glass, inside which a luminous dust, not sand, was shifting. "The clock is hungry," the old man said, handing the object to Tom. "It feeds on life's time. Your time. It has attached itself to you, to your family. Especially to the child. Her time is the purest, the brightest." "What is this?" Tom asked, cautiously taking the cold metal in his hands. "It's an anchor. Or, if you prefer, a cage. The clock cannot be destroyed, but it can be locked away. This device can absorb its power, but it requires payment. An equal exchange." "What payment?" Tom's heart sank. The old man looked him straight in the eye. His gaze was as heavy as a gravestone. "It will take time. Not the time that was, but the time that could have been. It demands years. Decades of a future. To stop the reverse flow, someone must willingly give up their future. Everything they have left." Tom froze. He understood. The clock was rewinding their past. And this anchor demanded their future. There was a chance for salvation, but the price was unimaginable. "One of you must do it," the old man continued. "You must return to the house, go to the clock, and break this vessel at its base. Whoever does it, their time will instantly flow into the anchor, and the clock will stop. They won't die. They will simply become old. Very old. And then they will be gone. Quickly. But the other two will be free. Their time will return to its normal course." Handing the anchor to Tom, the old man left the storeroom. Tom stood alone in the dim light, clutching his family's salvation and their curse in his hand. He was being offered a choice that should not exist. Save his wife and daughter by sacrificing himself? Or return and force Sarah to choose which of them would live, and which would burn out in mere moments, giving up all their future sunrises and sunsets. He knew that there was really no choice at all. Leaving the shop, Tom didn't say thank you or goodbye. He just started walking back down the road that led to the house that had become his prison. Now he carried the key, but this key was forged from his own life. The road back to the house seemed both longer and shorter. The anchor in Tom's hand was cold and heavy, its weight seeming to pull down not just his arm, but his soul. Every step was a step toward the gallows. He wasn't thinking about pain or the fear of death. He was thinking about what he would never see. Lily starting middle school, he and Sarah growing old together, sitting on the porch of this very house that was supposed to be their paradise but had become their hell. All those laters and somedays had compressed into a tight knot in his chest. When he reached the old oak tree, the boundary of their prison still shimmered in the air. He took a deep breath and stepped forward. This time, the sensation was different. He wasn't dragged through icy sludge. Instead, a memory flashed in his mind, vivid and alive. Lily, about 4 years old, sitting on his shoulders at the beach, her laughter ringing in the wind as the sun set over the ocean. He could feel the warmth of her small hands on his neck, the salty smell of the air, the boundless happiness of that moment. And then, the memory faded, washed out, and disappeared. As if it had never been. Only emptiness and a vague sense of loss for something incredibly precious remained. He had paid the price of entry with another piece of his soul. Tom stood on the lawn in front of the house. The few hours of his absence here, inside the dome, could have been days, or they could have been minutes. He pushed the door open. The house greeted him with the same hypnotic "Cock-sit." But something had changed. The air was thicker, the silence between the pendulum swings deeper. In the living room, on the rug, sat a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 7. She was wearing Lily's dress, she had Lily's hair, but her face was that of a child he barely remembered. She was intently building a tower of blocks they had put away in the attic 3 years ago. The girl looked up, and her eyes widened in surprise. There was no recognition in them. Only a child's curiosity toward a stranger. "Mommy, a man is here!" she called out in a clear voice. Tom's heart shattered. She didn't recognize him. The clock had stolen her father. Sarah came out of the kitchen. She looked young. 28. The Sarah he had fallen in love with, full of energy and light. But her eyes were empty. Confusion swirled in them. She looked at Tom, and a flicker of recognition, faint as a jet stream in the sky, crossed her face. "Tom?" she said uncertainly. "You. Where have you been?" I was cooking something, I think." She looked at her hands, as if she didn't know what to do with them. "Sarah," he breathed. "Why is your hair gray?" she asked with the same childlike directness as their daughter. The gray that had almost vanished had returned to his temples, the price for leaving and re-entering. For them, moving backward in time, this wasn't a return but a sudden, inexplicable aging. "Mommy, who is this man?" Lily asked again, hiding behind Sarah. Sarah hugged her, her gaze darting from Tom to the clock on the wall and back again. She didn't understand what was happening, but instinct told her that this man and this ticking thing were somehow connected. Her mind, cleansed of the recent years, couldn't piece the puzzle together, but it sensed a threat. "It's okay, sweetie," she told Lily, then turned to Tom, a note of fear in her voice. "What's happening? I don't understand. My head, everything is so fuzzy." Tom looked at them, at his wife, who barely recognized him, and at his daughter, who had become a stranger to him. He saw them slowly dissolving, turning into ghosts, echoes of themselves. And he knew that explanations were futile. There was no time. Every cock-sit was another lost day, another erased memory. He held up the anchor. The luminous dust inside swirled faster. "What is that?" Sarah asked, taking a step back. "Our salvation," Tom answered. His voice was firm. All the pain, all the despair had crystallized into a single purpose. He moved toward the clock. His footsteps echoed loudly in the ensuing silence. Sarah cried out when she realized he was going to do something to the huge, mesmerizing clock that had become the center of their universe. Don't touch it!" she screamed. It wasn't a cry of understanding, but an irrational fear, like a child whose favorite, albeit dangerous, toy is being taken away. She rushed at him, trying to stop him. But he was stronger. Gently but firmly, he pushed her aside. He stood directly in front of the clock's face, which showed an unknown, reverse time. In the dim glass of the door, the reflection of a tired man, aged in a single day, looked back at him. He turned and looked at them one last time. At his beautiful, young wife with eyes full of fear and confusion. And at his little daughter, who was looking at him as if for the first time in her life. Tom tried to memorize them like this. To preserve this final image before he had nothing left. "I love you," he whispered. And swinging back, he smashed the anchor with all his might against the carved wooden base of the clock. At the moment of impact, there was no loud explosion. Only a dry, cracking sound, like breaking ice. The dull glass of the anchor shattered into 1,000 pieces, and the luminous dust within burst out. But it wasn't just light. It was the very essence of time, unleashed and hungry. It didn't dissipate but surged upward, absorbing into the dark wood of the clock like water into dry earth. And in that same instant the cock-sit sound stopped. An absolute, deafening silence fell. The pendulum, which had been swinging relentlessly, trembled, slowed, and froze, hanging motionless. The hands on the dial stopped. Time had stopped. But only for the clock. For Tom, it hurtled forward with a monstrous, unimaginable speed. Sarah screamed, but the sound was caught in her throat. She watched as Tom's hair turned white before her eyes, like snow in a time-lapse video. His skin lost its elasticity, first covered with fine lines, then deep wrinkles, and then age spots. His shoulders slumped, his back bent. His strong body withered, shrank, as if life were being siphoned out of him. Decades flew by in seconds. 40 years old, 50, 70, 90. The future he was supposed to have burned away in an instant. Simultaneously, a hurricane erupted in Sarah's mind. The memories erased by the clock came flooding back. Her worry over Tom's disappearance. Their attempts to leave, only to return again and again. Lily showing her the healed knee. The neighbors' names, buying milk, the gray in Tom's hair, their daughter's lost tooth, it all fell back into place. The horror of the past few days returned in full, superimposed on the dull apathy she had felt a moment before. Her head was splitting with pain, but with the pain, she herself was returning. Her age, her experience, her fear, all of it was hers again. Lily cried out too, but in a different voice, the voice of a 10-year-old girl. She suddenly grew several inches, her features becoming familiar again. The 7-year-old had vanished, and in her place stood a frightened girl who had just seen a stranger turn into her father, and then into a frail old man. And she remembered everything. "Daddy!" she screamed, and in that cry was all the pain and horror of realization. Sarah, finally finding her voice, rushed to what was left of her husband. He had fallen to his knees, his body trembling. She caught him, preventing him from hitting the floor. She held a withered, fragile body in her arms, looked into a face covered with parchment-like skin, and searched for her Tom in his faded, watery eyes. He looked up at her. In the depths of those old, dying eyes, for a fraction of a second, a flicker of recognition sparked. Love. Farewell. His hand, weak and bony, twitched, trying to touch her cheek, but stopped halfway. He took a final, ragged breath, and his head fell limply onto her shoulder. It was over. Sarah sat on the floor, cradling the body of the old man who had been her husband, and wailed. It wasn't crying. It was an animalistic, primal howl of grief and loss. Lily ran to her and clung to her, sobbing and calling for her father. Outside the window, something had changed. The world was real again. Sarah heard the distant sound of a passing car. The barrier was gone. They were free. The clock on the wall was silent. Now it was just a piece of old wood with frozen hands. It had taken what it wanted and needed nothing more. It hung over the scene of devastation like a silent, indifferent monument to the sacrifice that had been made. The house of their dreams was filled with silence. But it wasn't the peaceful silence they had dreamed of. It was the deafening silence of absence. A silence in which Tom's laughter would never be heard again. Sarah and Lily were saved. Time had given them back their past. But the future they had bought at such a terrible price was now forever poisoned by the memory of watching the man who loved them more than life itself burn away before their eyes. And that countdown would tick in their hearts until the very end. The first problem was reality. How do you explain to the police that an unknown 90-year-old man has died in your house, and your 40-year-old husband, Thomas Miller, has vanished without a trace? Sarah tried. Stuttering, faltering, she told them about the clock, about time running backward, about the antique shop. She saw it in the young officer's eyes, a mixture of pity and suspicion. To him, she was a woman in shock, possibly out of her mind. The old man's body was taken to the morgue. No fingerprints were found in any databases. No dental records existed. No one could identify him. He was a nobody. The case of John Doe's death by natural causes, heart failure, was quickly closed. And the case of Thomas Miller's disappearance remained open. Months went by, but no leads ever surfaced. To the rest of the world, he had simply walked out of his house and never returned. Sarah and Lily couldn't stay in the house. Every corner, every creak of the floorboards reminded them of Tom, of that last, horrible minute. The living room became a forbidden zone for them. They couldn't even look at the wall where the silent clock hung. Sarah put the house up for sale at a ridiculously low price. She just needed to get away. The real estate agent, showing the house to potential buyers, always noted with admiration the magnificent antique clock in the living room, a true work of art. No one knew it wasn't a decoration, but a tombstone. The clock stayed with the house. Sarah didn't dare touch it, afraid it would wake up again. Sometimes she dreamed that a new family would wind it, and the nightmare would start all over. They moved to another state, to a faceless suburb where the houses were all the same and the histories were simple. Sarah got a job at the local library, surrounding herself with silence and the dusty volumes of other people's lives. Lily started at a new school. But they weren't free. The prison of the invisible dome had become a prison of memory. Lily became a quiet, withdrawn girl. She was afraid of mirrors, afraid to see her face changing again. She would flinch at the sound of any clock. At night she would scream, and Sarah would sit by her bed for hours, just as she had when Lily was very small, and whisper that everything was okay, even though she knew it was a lie. 5 years passed. Lily became a teenager. Outwardly, she was no different from her peers, but in her eyes, a permanent shadow had settled, one that neither teachers nor her few friends could understand. Sarah had aged. Not from time, but from grief. Real gray hairs appeared in her hair, the kind no damned clock could erase. She often found herself looking at old photos of Tom, trying to remember his voice, his laugh, the feel of his hand in hers. But the memories, though returned, were tainted, stained by the image of his decay. One evening, they were walking home from a movie. It was a rare moment of almost normal life. They were silent, but it was a comfortable silence. Passing by the window of a small workshop, Lily suddenly stopped dead in her tracks. The window was filled with all kinds of clocks, wristwatches, pocket watches, mantel clocks. And in the very center, on red velvet, stood a large grandfather clock made of dark wood. It didn't look like the clock, but it was ticking. Tick. Tock. Tick. Tock. Loud, measured, correct. Sarah saw Lily's eyes widen. Saw her face turn pale. Heard her choked breath. Their reflections were in the window, a woman and a girl, forever trapped in a single moment. "Mom!" Lily whispered, her eyes fixed on the steady swing of the pendulum. "Do you hear it? It's still ticking." Sarah hugged her daughter. Clocks would always tick. Time would always move forward. But for the two of them, survivors of its anomaly, every tick of the hand would be an eternal reminder of the day time went backward, taking from them everything they held dear. The countdown was over, but the silence that followed was more terrifying than any sound.